Let's duck up to the Hunter Valley in New South Wales and catch up with National Senator from Queensland, former Resources Minister Matt Canavan. Great to talk to you again, Matt. What's your take on states and borders? Your own state of Queensland is finally opening up on December the 1st, but you've got Western Australia and Tasmania still holding out.
Well, look, I do support states' rights. I support the state's right to decide on these travel restrictions during quarantine. As that being said, I think some of the decisions being made are very parochial and short-sighted. I would wish and hope that decisions would be made on where the virus is, not where a line was drawn on a map sometime back in the middle of the 19th century. And so, yep, fair enough. Restrict travel when an outbreak occurs, but let's define them as hotspots, not states, because places like where I am at the moment, the Hunter Valley, it's been coronavirus free for months and months and months, but for many of that time it's been locked out of Queensland completely unnecessarily.
Has any Premier been as practical, as pragmatic, as straightforward on this pandemic response as Gladys Berejiklian?
Well, look, I'm not here to rate them all. I'll leave that to others. But I do think the New South Wales government and Gladys Berejiklian have conducted themselves in an impressive way through this coronavirus. Keep in mind, they've been this state, New South Wales, has been bearing the burden and the weight of the international travellers coming back to Australia. That has been a source of outbreak in Victoria and South Australia, but it didn't happen in New South Wales. And of course, when there has been an outbreak in New South Wales, like one that came up from Victoria, they've managed it professionally. They've had a good testing and tracing regime. They've kept the public alert, if you like, but not alarmed, and life has gone on. So we could all learn a lesson. I think I learned a lot of lessons from the New South Wales government. You
did right. They deserve some credit. So let's get stuck into them now on another issue, because you are taking you're focusing on this new renewable energy push and the energy infrastructure legislation they're putting to Parliament. It's a coalition government, so this is a policy backed by your Nationals colleagues, including John Barilaro, who was on the program earlier this week. But you point out in the Daily Telegraph today that there's a charge in here on the electricity sector. There's effectively an additional electricity tax. So they're handing over some government money. Taxpayers are handing out grants to support renewables, and the industry is going to be taxed. So this is obviously going to be an additional burden on electricity consumers, i.e. all of us.
Well, it is very disappointing, Chris. It's very disappointing for me as a proud Nationals member who has fought against taxes for the last decade, trying to get rid of taxes off the Australian public, off Australian businesses, because I think a country with lower taxes does better. So it's really disappointing that people of my own party, my own colleagues, choose to increase taxes on Australian businesses and on the Australian public. And look, yes, that's a little hard to criticise your own friends and colleagues, but our first duty, my first duty, is to the people I represent, the good and hard-working people in our coal industry, like here in the Hunter Valley and in central Queensland where I'm from, because this is a tax. It's a tax placed on people's power bills, all with the aim of putting coal-fired power stations out of action, and all with the aim or the cause or the effect, all with the effect of lifting power prices. The Act itself says that the Minister and his consumer trustee can determine how much money renewable energy needs each year. It's quite an extraordinary act. They get to determine how much money each year the renewable energy industry needs, and then that money is recovered by making electricity distribution networks make a contribution, a tax, to that fund to pay for the renewable energy investors. And Chris, doesn't this just put the absolute lie to the myth that renewables is cheaper? We're told that all the time, that renewables is cheaper. Well, if it's cheaper, why do they need taxes on our electricity bills to pay off their investments?
Well, spot on. Now, as you say, the legislation calls this a contribution. The electricity distributors have to make a contribution to support the renewable energy sector. As you say, that means it's a tax. If the government's telling them to cough up more money, that's a tax. And in fact, this is effectively a carbon tax, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I make contributions. Chris, I make contributions when I go to Mass. I put some money in the plate. I call that a contribution or a donation. I don't think a contribution, a mandatory contribution, which you were made to pay at pain of a $220,000 penalty under this Act, I don't think that's a contribution. It is a tax. It's using the government-enforced power of the law to make you pay, and that's a tax. And we know that a tax on electricity companies is going to lead to higher power prices, higher power bills. And as I say, this particular tax goes back to funding renewable energy. And so it is a carbon tax because it's only the benefits of the tax or the benefits of the proceeds of the tax will flow to non-carbon sources of energy, non-coal-fired power sources of energy. And that's just absurd. Where here I am in the Hunter Valley with the world's best thermal coal. If we burn a tonne of Hunter Valley thermal coal, it'll lead to 30% fewer emissions than in Indonesia, than Indonesian coal, 70% lower emissions than Indian coal. We should be using Hunter Valley coal to protect the environment and create jobs here in Australia.
Look, I can't fault your logic. This is a tax because it's the government demanding companies pay a contribution. It is aimed at reducing the use of fossil fuels and encouraging renewables, so it's aimed at reducing our carbon dioxide emissions. So we do have this bizarre situation where a coalition state government, a Nationals and Liberal state government, is now proposing to legislate a form of carbon tax.
It's the disappointing outcome, Chris, particularly given those of us that have fought against this for years. And it's been done in this sort of sneaky way, right, where, as you were outlining, it's been called a contribution. There's been no public debate about this. There's been no explanation to the Australian people, the New South Wales people, why this is happening. Indeed, there's been no consultation with the electricity sector. So you've seen this week that AGL and Delta Electricity, a large coal-fired power producer here in New South Wales, have said they haven't been told about this, and they're going to hold up their investment plans now because there's complete uncertainty about what might have to happen in the future. One part of this Act, Chris, just to show you how draconian this is one part of this Act gives the Minister the power to direct and make a network provider, an electricity network provider, to build a transmission line. So they're made to build something. Now, this is a Liberal National government, Chris. This is a Liberal National government saying that a minister in a government can force a company to do something, not just to pay a tax or to get a subsidy, but to actually go and do that. You've got to go and build that thing whether you want it or not. We're the government, we're the law, and you'll do as we say. I think that is completely against the principles and values that I stand up for as a member of the Nationals Party and a member of the LNP in Queensland.
This is an extraordinary clash in policy between state and federal coalition governments. What will the federal government do? What will you be urging the federal government do to prevent this going ahead?
I think we should build a coal-fired power station. Let's drop all this rubbish of working together, because we're not, right? They're doing their own thing. Fine. I think we should use our defence powers, as we did to build Snowy Hydro, and build a coal-fired power station in the Hunter Valley here using the world's best thermal coal. Last year we had a proposal from Vales Point to build a new Healy coal-fired power station. It wasn't proceeded with because it was seen to be unpopular ahead of the election. That was shown to be a complete mistake, given coal effectively won us the election. And I think now let's drop all this rubbish of trying to work together, because we're not. And what happened after World War II is the state governments wouldn't agree to Snowy Hydro, the Snowy 1.0. They wouldn't agree to it. And so the Commonwealth government just said, that's it, we're doing it anyway. We're going to use our defence powers to do it because we need reliable electricity to protect ourselves. And it got built. Eventually the states came on board later. And I think we just got to get behind common sense now and take charge of this issue because we are going to see our manufacturing industry and our manufacturing jobs continue to fly off to China unless we do something to restore energy competitiveness in this country.
Very, very strong arguments and points there, Matt Canavan. I appreciate you joining us. I know you're in the Hunter to look at coal mines and the coal industry, but it looks like you've got some beautiful wineries in the background too. Enjoy.
It's a lovely area. It's a lovely area here. Make sure you come up and visit. Queenslanders can come here too now. How good.
Fantastic. Matt Canavan there, who's a Queensland Senator, of course, a former Resources Minister. Powerful stuff there. His criticism of his own party's effective coalition government policies and legislation in New South Wales.